December 1944. The forests of the Ardennes are frozen, silent, and blanketed in deep snow. For months, this sector of the Western Front has been eerily quiet, a place the Allied High Command calls the Ghost Front. It's a place for green, untested troops to get their first taste of war and for battle-weary divisions to rest. But in the pre-dawn darkness of December 16th, that silence is about to be shattered by the roar of 1,000 artillery pieces. This is the beginning of Hitler's last desperate gamble, the Battle of the Bulge, a massive armored fist spearheaded by the most feared units in the German war machine, the 1st SS Panzer Division, is poised to smash through the thin American lines, cross the Meuse River, and seize the port of Antwerp, splitting the Allied armies in two. The German timetable is ruthlessly ambitious. They must reach the Meuse by the end of the first day. Standing directly in the path of this armored juggernaut on a lonely, snow-covered hill near the tiny Belgian village of Lanzerath is a single, forgotten American platoon. They are not hardened veterans. They are not a frontline combat unit. They are an intelligence and reconnaissance platoon of just 18 men, led by a lieutenant who is only 20 years old. They have been ordered to hold at all costs. They have no tanks, no anti-tank guns, and no artillery support. What happened on that frozen ridge should have been a footnote, a tiny American unit erased from the map in minutes. Instead, for 10 brutal hours, those 18 men would defy impossible odds. This is the story of the 18 men who were ordered to die, and what they did instead. The unit at the heart of the story was the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon of the 394th Infantry Regiment, part of the 99th Infantry Division. The 99th was a green division, so new to the war that they were nicknamed the Battle Babies. They had only arrived in Europe in November 1944, and the Ardennes was their first assignment. The I&R platoon wasn't even supposed to be a combat unit. Their job was to be the eyes and ears of the regiment, conducting patrols, manning observation posts, and gathering intelligence. But these weren't average soldiers. Many had been pulled from the Army Specialized Training Program, which meant they were college students handpicked for their high IQs and fitness. They were thinkers and expert marksmen trained to be scouts, not line infantry. Their commander was First Lieutenant Lyle Bouck. At just 20 years old, he was one of the youngest officers in the entire U.S. Army. But his age was deceiving. Bouck had enlisted in the National Guard at 14 to help support his family during the Depression, becoming a sergeant by 16. He was a natural leader, meticulous and professional, and he had personally selected every man in his platoon. He knew their strengths, their weaknesses, and he trusted them completely. In early December, Bouck's platoon was sent to occupy a position on a ridge just outside Lanzerath. It was a strange assignment. The position was isolated, sitting in a gap between two American divisions. Bouck was uneasy. He knew his platoon was exposed. Following his instincts, he put his men to work. They didn't just occupy the foxholes left by a previous unit. They improved them, digging them deeper and reinforcing the tops with thick pine logs. They carefully planned their fields of fire, ensuring every position could support the others. They zeroed their automatic weapons on a wire fence that cut across the field in front of them. When they were done, their line of fortified foxholes stretched 300 yards along the wooded crest of the hill, completely invisible from the road below, hidden under a blanket of fresh snow. They were preparing for a fight they were told would never come. On the night of December 15th, the men in the foxholes could hear it. The unmistakable sound of engines, hundreds of them rumbling and clanking on the other side of the German border. Bouck ordered his men to stay awake and on high alert. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16th, the world exploded. A massive 90-minute artillery barrage tore into the American lines. Shells screamed down, shattering the frozen trees and turning the snow-covered forest into a hell of fire, shrapnel, and splintered wood. The men of the I&R platoon huddled in their log-covered foxholes as the earth shook around them. The bombardment cut their communication lines to headquarters. They were completely on their own. When the shelling finally stopped, a silence fell over the woods. Bouck moved from foxhole to foxhole, checking on his men. Miraculously, their reinforced positions had held. No one was seriously injured, but they knew the barrage was a prelude. Something bigger was coming. Just after 8 a.m., they saw it. Emerging from the morning fog, a long column of German soldiers marched into Lanzerath. They weren't just a patrol. It was a full battalion of German paratroopers, 500 men strong, the vanguard for the 1st SS Panzer Division waiting just behind them. Bouck managed to get a field telephone working and frantically called his regimental headquarters. He reported the size of the German force. The voice on the other end of the line was dismissive, thinking the young lieutenant was exaggerating. Artillery support was denied. It was needed elsewhere. Bouck asked what he should do. The order came back, cold and final. Hold at all costs. Bouck knew what that meant. It was a death sentence. But it was an order. He relayed it to his men. Not a single soldier questioned it. They checked their weapons, laid out their ammunition, and waited. The German paratroopers, told they were facing only token resistance, were dangerously overconfident. Their commander didn't bother with reconnaissance or flanking maneuvers. He ordered a frontal assault straight up the open, snow-covered field toward the wooded ridge. From their hidden foxholes, Bouck and his men watched them come. They were disciplined, holding their fire as hundreds of soldiers in long gray coats advanced across the snow. Bouck's plan was simple and deadly. Let them get so close they couldn't miss. He waited until the lead Germans were just yards from the wire fence they had used as a range marker. Then he gave the order. The ridge erupted in a storm of machine gun and rifle fire. The Germans, caught completely in the open, were scythed down in crimson streaks on the white snow. The shock and confusion were absolute. The first wave collapsed into a chaos of dead and wounded as the paratroopers scrambled for cover, leaving dozens of bodies motionless in the snow. The Americans' fire was so intense and came from so many different points that the Germans were convinced they had stumbled into the main defensive line of an entire American regiment. They pulled back to regroup. A short while later, they tried again. And again, the handful of Americans decimated their ranks. The battle for Lanzerath Ridge settled into a brutal rhythm. The Germans would launch a furious assault and the tiny platoon would unleash a devastating volley of fire, breaking the attack before it could gain momentum. Individual acts of incredible bravery became commonplace. When a machine gunner was hit, 19-year-old Private William Tsakanikas, a runner for the platoon, left his foxhole under withering fire, took over the exposed .50 caliber machine gun on a jeep, and raked the advancing enemy. In another foxhole, Private Risto Milosevic single-handedly manned a .30 caliber machine gun, feeding the belt with one hand while firing with the other, cutting down a German soldier who was about to throw a grenade into their perimeter. Lieutenant Bouck himself seemed to be everywhere, running from foxhole to foxhole, redistributing ammunition, encouraging his men, and directing their fire, all while completely exposed to the enemy. For nearly 10 hours, the cycle repeated. 3 major frontal assaults were thrown back with catastrophic losses for the Germans. The snow-covered slope below the American position was littered with the bodies of nearly 100 German soldiers, but the platoon was paying a price. Ammunition was running dangerously low. Most of the men were wounded, some seriously. Their rifles were overheating, their machine guns jamming. They were exhausted, freezing, and isolated. As dusk began to fall, Bouck knew they couldn't hold out much longer. He planned to pull his men back under the cover of darkness, but it was too late. The German commander, finally realizing he wasn't facing a regiment, sent a force of about 50 paratroopers on a wide flanking maneuver through the woods. Suddenly, the enemy was behind them and inside their perimeter. The end came swiftly. The Germans moved from foxhole to foxhole. A burst of automatic fire hit Bouck in the leg. Another tore through William Tsakanikas' face, silencing his exposed machine gun. Out of ammunition and surrounded, the surviving members of the I and R platoon were captured one by one. Of the 18 soldiers, 14 were wounded, but not a single one had been killed in the day-long firefight. Their battle was over. As the wounded Americans were led down into the village, they were consumed by a sense of failure. They had been given orders to hold at all costs, and they had failed. They had lost the ridge. They had all been captured. In their minds, their sacrifice had been for nothing. But then they were taken to a small cafe the Germans were using as a command post. And there, they witnessed the first clue that their failure was not what it seemed. A high-ranking SS officer in a long black leather coat stormed in, shouting at the paratrooper commander, demanding to know why his advance had been held up for an entire day. That officer was Joachim Piper, the infamous commander of the 1st SS Panzer Division's lead combat group. He was supposed to be miles deep into Allied territory by now. Instead, his entire column of tanks and armored vehicles was backed up for miles, stuck behind a battle that should have been over in minutes. In that moment, the true impact of their stand was revealed. The 18 men of the I and R platoon, in holding off 500 Germans for an entire day, had given the Allies the one thing they needed most: time. The 10-hour delay at Lanzerath Ridge was a catastrophic disruption to the German timetable. It allowed American reinforcements to rush to the front and solidify their defenses at the crucial Elsenborn Ridge. The northern shoulder of the Bulge did not break. The German drive to Antwerp was doomed before it truly began. As one historian would later write, had Bouck's platoon not held the Germans for that crucial day, the Battle of the Bulge would have been a great German victory. The story of the I and R platoon's incredible stand was lost in the chaos of the battle. As prisoners of war, Bouck and his men had no idea of the monumental impact of their actions. For decades, their heroism went completely unrecognized. The official army records were thin, and the men themselves rarely spoke of a day they considered a personal defeat. But Lyle Bouck never forgot his men. For years, he tirelessly lobbied the government, writing letters and fighting to have their story told. Finally, on October 25, 1981, nearly 37 years after the battle, their sacrifice was officially recognized. In a single ceremony, every member of the platoon was decorated. They received a Presidential Unit Citation, 4 Distinguished Service Crosses, 5 Silver Stars, and 10 Bronze Stars for valor. In an instant, the forgotten soldiers of Lanzerath Ridge became the most decorated platoon of its size in all of World War II. It is a testament to the profound truth of warfare, that history can turn not just on the decisions of generals, but on the courage of a handful of soldiers in a forgotten place who were simply ordered to hold.